In this lesson, I'm going to help you understand how chords are formed. Now, before I show you, there's two things that you need to know about how chords are formed. The first thing is, let me just write this, chords. First thing is, chords are formed using the major scale. Major scale. The second thing you need to know about chords and how they're formed is they are formed by skipping every other note in this scale. So skipping note. I'll just write that. And let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to go and put a diagram, and I'm going to do this in the number system, because remember, the number system basically represents the major scale. It just assigns a number to the intervals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But instead of only writing one scale, I'm going to repeat it one more time. So after 7 comes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's basically two major scales back to back. Now, I'm going to show you the simplest chord of all is a major chord. Let me write this. So it doesn't matter what kind of major, C major, G major, because we are in the number format. It doesn't matter what key. This is universal for all keys. So for a major, by definition, a major chord includes the intervals 1, 3, and 5. So I would just go here and play this 1 note, 3 note, and 5 note, and I have my major chord. Also known, major, minor, diminished, augmented. Those are the 4 types of what's called triads. Triads. And they're called triads because there's tri or 3 notes involved. And that's all. So those are like the simplest of all chords because they only contain 3 notes. But let's say you want a little more complex sounding chord, a little more colorful chord. And so the next level of chords would include 4 notes. But watch this. Instead of including 6, because chords are formed by skipping notes, you would skip 6 and you would go to 7. So if you played 1, 3, 5, and 7, that chord is technically what's called a major 7th chord. Major 7th chord. 1, 3, 5, 7. And then let's say you want to get it a little more colorful. Okay, so this is where you'll see why this is important. So if you were to go 1, skip 2, 3, skip 4, 5, skip 6, 7, and then go to the next level here, which would be 2. But to use 2 is kind of complex. It's not complex, but it's confusing because, well, wait a minute. 2's down here, but we have 2 2's here. So instead of counting from 1 to 7 again, what happens is, here, let me pick this color. You just continue to add up from 7. So 1 becomes 8. 2 becomes 9. 3 becomes 10. 4, 11. 5, 12. 6, 13. 7, 14. But you can see 8 is basically the same as a 1 note. 10 is the same as 3. 13 is the same as 6, but this is just how it's done. So if I wanted to go to the next level of chords, it would be what's called the 9th chord. So if you play 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, or 2, it's the same note, that would be a major 9th chord. Well, let's say you want to play the next level. And this continues on, by the way, and I want to show you here. So if you were to go add one more note to this, you would skip 3 or 10, and you would go to 11 or 4. Now that makes sense now, because after you go to 7, if you didn't skip a note, you would end up going back to 1, but 1 is already played here. Same thing here. After the 2 or 9, if you were to go and skip to this 11 or I'm sorry, if you didn't skip, you went to the 10 or 3, well, the 3 is already being played here. That is why it's formed in this way. So after the 11th, they actually have 13th chords. We get to all these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes. And it doesn't get any higher than the 13th. And the reason why is this. Watch. Here, 1, you have 1 represented. Here you have 2 represented. Here you have 3 represented. Here you have 4 represented. 5, 6 represented here. 7 is represented here. And then if you think about it, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Basically, all 7 notes of the scale, the major scale, is represented as soon as you get to the 13th level of chords. And that is why you don't have like a chord like, a B 18 chord. Because it's by then you've already used up all the notes. The highest you'll see is 13, B 13. Now there are some rules and let's see. Yeah, when it comes to chord formation, there are some advanced rules you'll need to know, especially when you get to the 13th chord. Because to play a true 13, B13 chord, even though the way I showed you here would mean you play all 7 notes, that is technically not true, because when you play a B13, that is a form of a dominant chord. And a dominant chord doesn't use a 7, it uses a flatted 7th. And for some reason, when you play a 13 level chord, you actually omit the 11. You don't play this. So a true B13 chord, you would play the notes 1, 3, 5, flat 7, a 9 or a 2, 9. You skip the 11 or the 4, and you play the 13 or a 6. So that is what makes up a B13 chord. And there's another rule here, because to play all 6 of these notes on, let's say, a guitar, that takes every string on the guitar to play it. And when you play too many notes at once, it sounds real cluttered. And so they have these kind of rules on, if you had to omit one of these notes, which note would you omit? And basically the first note to go is the 5. They would take the 5th away. And then probably the second note they would take away, if you were playing in a full band, is the 1, because the bass player is probably playing the 1 note, and so you don't have to repeat it. So you can actually get away with playing a B13. You remember 13th chords are they involve the most amount of notes here, by just playing the 3rd, flat 7th, 9th, 13th. So as you can see, it does get a little complex, but this lesson, I just basically wanted to give you a visual of how these chords are formed and how this skipping notes and why this whole thing makes sense when you have 2 octaves worth of notes.